Hello and welcome to the Fulhamish YouTube channel with me, Dan Cooke. I hope you are enjoying the international break. We are 3 games in to the Premier League season, and tell you what, there's been a fair few talking points already out of Fulham. There's been some promising performances. There's been some concerning performances, but it feels like one of the big talking points that's come out of just 3 games so far is Andreas Pereira. And I tell you what, it's not uncommon, is it? Andreas has been a divisive player. I'd say probably since about halfway through his first season at Fulham. I think if you go back 2 years when he first came into the side, you would probably have just seen overwhelming compliments and praise for our midfielder. But ever since then, he has certainly pulled at either side of the fan base, and you get people on pockets of one side who absolutely love him, and on the other side, there are certainly quite a few who thinks that he should probably fall out of this team, and it's time he moved on. So I wanted to look into this, and I think the big reason why it's stoked up debate all over again is the position that he's been playing in so far this season. This new role for Andreas Pereira, slightly deeper. If we were saying in the past 2 years he's played as the number 10, just in behind the striker, this season he's certainly been playing deeper in that sort of number 8 role. And I guess part of it is through necessity. The Joao Palhinha transfer has meant that because we didn't move quickly enough to get Sanderberger in, Andreas has had to start the season deeper. And it's not necessarily a new thing for him. If anything, Marco Silva was probably the manager that reinstated Andreas back into the number 10 role. That's probably his favourite. Before that, he had started to play fairly deeper in his previous clubs. And so interesting to see Marco drop him back into that number 8 role, but probably unsurprising given how light we were in midfield. But his performances there have sparked a lot of debate. There's been a lot of discussion around whether he can actually play that role, whether does it work for Fulham. And so I thought I'd take the opportunity to run through some numbers, my own thoughts on how Andreas has fared so far this season, and try and give a balanced argument to something that I think is very easy to fall on one side or the other. So trying to give this as balanced a viewpoint as possible. And so with that in mind, I think we've got to start with the positives. And I was looking through the stats, and it's worth bearing in mind we're only 3 games into the season. It's not a big sample size. However, there are some stats that translate back to last season and the season before. It's not that we've necessarily seen a departure from the player Andreas Pereira was and what he was doing on the pitch. It's just a slightly different role. So his stats are sort of remain fairly consistent, but they're happening on a different part of the pitch. And I think that's probably quite important. But to start with, I think one of the things that has been true for Andreas since he joined, if we look at expected assists, and expected assists is a metric that I quite like. And it just looks at, based on the pass you've made, how good a chance are you creating effectively? And so that expected assist will ramp up with every pass you make in the attacking third, and it assesses effectively how creative a player is or how important they are for a team to create chances. And Andreas Pereira, so far this season, is number 1. He has the highest expected assists, just nudging out Adama Traore, who has started the season really well. And it was the same last season. Andreas was our number 1 producer of expected assists. He performed best in that metric. And is it surprising? Potentially. But it just shows how pivotal he is to this side and the areas of the pitches that he picks up, how often he's on the ball. And also, and we're going to come on to it, set pieces are another crucial part of Andreas Pereira and what he adds to this team. If we move on to a stat that I think maybe is more surprising so far this season, and actually is really strongly displays the fact that he's playing in a new role. In terms of number of passes attempted in the squad so far this season, so per per game, per 90 minutes or total, regardless of how you look at it, he has attempted the second most passes in the squad. Only Calvin Bassey has attempted more passes than Andreas Pereira. And I think this is really important, and this shows that he's playing deeper in this side. Because one of the strong criticisms of Andreas across his first 2 years at the club is probably that he would go missing in games, which I think sometimes actually is just the nature of a number 10 and the role they play. It's easy for them to go through 10, 15-minute spells where they just don't see very much of the ball. And Andreas was definitely guilty of this at times over the past 2 seasons. But if you look at those numbers, the fact that he's attempting the second most passes in the squad shows that he's way more involved. And that, I think, has to come as a result of playing deeper in the pitch. He is available to pick the ball off the central defenders, off the fullbacks, and he's not necessarily waiting for the second or third pass in a sequence to reach him. Sometimes he receives the first pass that we have in a possession of in a passage of play, and so that shows that he is really important so far this season in trying to make things tick. And now you can have your thoughts and feelings on whether he's doing it well, but it's clear that Marco is using him as a key part of the build-up play, getting the ball into Andreas Pereira, seeing if he can get us up the field. And where that then further translates, if we look at progressive passes, now progressive passes are slightly more nuanced metric. They're a bit more complex, but effectively what it means is you're getting the ball closer to the opposition's goal by making passes that travel over 10 yards. And those are they're only progressive passes. They're only considered this if they happen in the final 60% of the pitch. So if you make a pass from within your own box 10 yards forward, that's not a progressive pass. Where it is if you're making one on the halfway line and you're getting us 10 yards closer to the opposition goal, that's a progressive pass, and that's really important. That's something when you talk about things like progressive passing, like breaking the lines. It's someone who is able not just to recycle possession and go nicely left and right. These are decisive passes that have intent and get you forward. And Andreas is top of those as well. He has made the most progressive passes in this squad. So, like, as we start to build up this picture of Andreas, and I think we've seen a lot of discourse around this because there'll be games so far this season where he's put in a performance that some people would say is, it might be hyperbolic, but like a 4 out of 10. It was a really poor performance from Andreas. And then the next day, the stats come out and he's top of the chances created. He's top of the progressive passes. All of these metrics he ranks highest in. And I think that's really interesting because it's quite rare to see such a disconnect from what we're seeing with our eyes and what we're feeling and what the numbers are actually saying. And that's why I think Andreas is a little bit of an enigma. He is slightly unusual in this aspect. And I think we progress it one more and as sort of nicely tie off the metrics that are really backing up why Marco persists with Andreas Pereira is this idea of key passes. Now, key passes, super simple metric. They're literally just defined as a pass that you make that then instantly turns into a shot. So the player that you pass the ball to has a shot as a result of the pass they've received from you. And Andreas Pereira has made 14 key passes, which is nearly double. It's nearly triple anyone else in the squad. Second in key passes is Adama Traore with 5. So you can see the disconnect here. Andreas is way above anyone else in this squad for this idea of key passes. And it just shows that he really is, he's a creative force and an important part of this side when we have the ball in possession. And then when you go away from that, out of possession, we also know the value he brings in terms of the work rate he's got. One of the things that I've always believed with Andreas, and one of the reasons why I think Marco really likes him, is his ability to execute instructions. I think he is a very system-oriented player in the sense that he is happy to bend and bow to the request of the manager and will always do his best to put out what his manager wants. And that is why I think we've seen him drop from that 10 to that number 8 role. it's not necessarily because Marco thinks he's best there, but Marco trusts him most there, I think, and that's important. He believes that as long as he says to Andreas, "This is what I want you to do. This is where I want you to be," he believes he'll do it, and I think he's right for that. There are so many things that people can say about Andreas. One thing you can't fault him for is effort and work rate, and I think that's really important. And it is actually a key part of that box to box number 8 role. You need running, you need legs, and Pereira has rarely ever looked fatigued to me. He looks like he is always capable of going for a full 90 minutes non-stop, herring about, and that is a very important trait. I will caveat that, I think, with that whilst his work rate is superb, and it worked really well when he was playing in the number 10 role, because he was able to do the pressing that Alexander Mitrovic wasn't able to do. And it was a bit frantic. It was just high octane, high energy. I'm going to chase this ball across the pitch. I do feel like by playing deeper, his pressing and his work rate has slightly, it is not as effective because it's not as intentional. If you think about an unfair comparison, but if you think about Joao Palhinha, he was intelligent with his pressing of the ball, with his tackling. He was very good at sensing the right place to be. And I'm not quite sure Andreas is as good at that right now, because it's not a role he's played in a long time. But it feels like he gets caught out of position quite frequently. I think if you think about that first game of the season at Old Trafford, there were times when we felt like we just lacked a midfield. Like there were just holes in midfield, and their goal certainly came as a result of just space for them to run into through the middle of the pitch, which shouldn't happen. And then if you look at the Ipswich game last weekend, exactly the same issue. One player in this situation was able to just run pretty much in a straight line through the heart of our midfield because there was no one there. And I think that's an issue, and that's a problem that you have with Pereira and Lukic. Neither of them are necessarily the most stable defensive player that you could have in that position. And so I think this is where obviously Sander Berge comes in, and he's going to play an important role in that midfield. But again, coming back to Andreas and that work rate and that effort and that ability to execute instructions, I think that's another thing that is so important. And as fans, sometimes I think that you can be critical, but you should always limit your criticism if someone is just putting as big a shift in as they can as possible, because it's frustrating when you see Andreas make errors, but I don't think I've ever got frustrated at him not putting in an amount of effort that was required. And I think people have to bear that in mind. Unfortunately, despite all of those good things that he's been doing this season and the 2 seasons prior, there are downsides too. And one of the things that I have started to question myself is it feels like the really good things Andreas does sometimes go under the radar. If you think about work rate, if you think about getting on the ball quite a lot, making quite a lot of passes, I think that they sometimes can just slip past people. People can miss those. The issues that he displays at times are more obvious. It's things like misplacing passes that people pick up on quite quickly and they stick in the memory. As soon as you talk about a misplace with Andreas Pereira this season, you go to Old Trafford, don't you? You're thinking of that 2-on-1 we had with Alex Iwobi herring down the left. It was Harry Maguire trying to deal with Pereira and Iwobi, and it was a simple pass. It was one pass. He had multiple ways he could have played it, and he fudged it. And that sticks in people's minds. And I think this is why we start to see more criticism of him, is because there's a slight imbalance between what's visible that he does well and what's visible that he does badly. And I think the weight of the mistakes he makes sort of sits above the positives. And that's a shame for Andreas. And I think it's a reason why, as fans, sometimes we can look and say to Marco, why is he still in this side? Is because we focus on those bad bits that happen across 5% of the game, whereas Marco has his eyes on that 95% of the other stuff that goes sort of unspoken and the unsung stuff that Andreas does. But if we have a look at the numbers that count against him, and I think this is a big one, and this is one that I strongly believe in as to why I don't like him in this number 8 role. So far this season, he's completed 68% of his passes. Last season, it was 70%. Season before, 66%. So it's, consistency there. This is not a result of bad form. This is not a result of the position he's playing in. He's fairly consistently putting out passing numbers, completion percentages between 65 and 70%, which is low. That is a low number. And if we compare that to any other central midfielder that Fulham had, so we're going Tom Cairney, Harrison Reed, Sasha Lukic, you include in there last season Joao Polina, all of those other midfielders we have average way over 80% in terms of pass completion, some of them bordering on 90%. So you're looking at a difference there of for some of the players in Fulham's midfield, 20% between what Pereira completes and what someone like Sasha Lukic completes. And now it's understandable in the number 10 role, and you will often see it if you go and look at the statistics of an attacking midfielder, their passing statistics tend to be lower. I think a good example of it is Bruno Fernandes, Manchester United. His pass completion is usually not that great. However, the reason for that, and the reason why at times it was forgivable for Andreas in previous seasons, is when you're in that number 10 role, you're tasked with that sort of final ball. You're tasked with unpicking a defence, trying to do something that has an element of risk to it that is less likely to come off in an attempt to create a goal-scoring opportunity. And then if you compare that to what maybe a deeper lying midfielder would be doing, it's a lot more of the simple stuff. It's a lot more recycling possession, safer passes, not taking risks in your own half. But as a number 10, you take more risks and you see your pass completion take a hit because of it. The problem we've got with Andreas is that playing deeper and still failing to complete 30% of your passes is a concern. And it's especially a concern because of where you're failing to complete those passes. Now, that example against United was frustrating, and that was a chance that we missed out on creating. However, it's way more costly if you're losing the ball in your own half, in your own third, because of a sloppy pass. And I think that's the frustrating thing with Andreas. And that's something that if he is going to play in this role, if he is going to play in a midfield 3 with Smith Rowe ahead of him, he's got to improve that consistency in his passing output, because he is capable of picking up the ball in his own half and pinging it 40 yards perfectly. Right? We've seen it. We know he has the ability, which makes it all the more frustrating when you've got a 5-10 yard pass that looks so simple and he just gets it wrong. And the problems that poses when you get it wrong in your own half, and I think we saw it slightly against Ipswich, given it was a little bit further forward on the pitch, but where he gave the ball away to Leif Davis and the space that he left behind him for Liam Delap to run into and score that goal was in a microcosm, a good example of why maybe Andreas Pereira in the number 8 isn't the right place for him. And I think that's my big takeaway from this, is that I still think there is a space for Pereira in this side. He is so important. And if you talk about beyond the sort of the live play numbers, one thing we've not touched upon is his dead ball ability. Now, we've had 21 corners this season, looking at the numbers. Andreas has taken every single one of them. He's taken every corner we've had, both from the left and the right. So he is vital from dead ball situations. It's those numbers tell it straight away. And it's one thing that sort of, I think, tempers his creative output. And this is where, when you run through all of those good positive numbers that he's got going forward, they are tempered by the fact that a lot of the chances he creates, a lot of the expected assists he generates come from dead ball situations. They come from his corners. And I think that stokes an interesting debate, because is that inherently a good or a bad thing? It's sort of hard to know, because it feels like, should he be creating more from open play? Probably. But is it a problem that he creates so much from set pieces? No, it's a good thing. You look at James Ward-Prowse as a great example of someone who has deficiencies when the ball is in live play, but he provides so much from dead ball situations that he was consistently, performing at top levels for Southampton, and probably less so West Ham, but he saw himself into the England team because of those abilities that he had. And we are a very big squad this year. If you think about the aerial threats we've got, when we're at full strength, you've got in there Calvin Bassey, Joachim Andersen, Sander Berge, Rodrigo Muniz. There's a lot to aim for. And so if you can take good set pieces, I think Fulham get quite a few goals from them. We have so far created the highest number of shots from corners. So we're doing things right. Andreas is doing the right things. They just haven't resulted in a goal yet. But I think it's inevitable that it will come. And so in those situations, you do want to have a very good set piece taker in your side when you have the weapons that we have. So Andreas is clearly useful in that aspect. And I'm not sure who comes in and takes them if it's not him. We know Harry Wilson is good from dead ball situations, but he's not been in the squad a huge amount. He's, coming off the bench, fringe appearances. And then you think Emile Smith-Rowe, I'm sure, is very capable of taking them. But there is something about Andreas's delivery which is superb. And we have been very, very good from set pieces since we returned to the Premier League. So it's really difficult, I think, this one to assess. And if I was to look at it and I had to put out there what I think Fulham's best midfield trio is, for me, at full strength, we probably look like Sander Berge right at the base. And next to him, based on performances this season, Sasha Lukic, I think, slots in there alongside Sander Berge. And I think it frees up Sasha quite nicely, having that muscle back next to him. And then in the number 10 role, you've got Emile Smith-Rowe. And this is where I'm struggling, is where does Andreas fit into this side? Because we've already seen how important he is to this squad. But there are frustrations and deficiencies that, unless Andreas can fix those, I think we start to see him drift out of being a core first 11 player this season, having started pretty much nearly every available minute since he joined the club. This season feels like a moment where that might stop happening. And the only way that I think Andreas gets into a full strength Fulham side at the moment is if you play Emile Smith-Rowe on the left and Pereira in the 10. And given the way that Iwobi started this season, it's a tricky one, because I think I think Alex has been good by and large, still not perfect. So I think there might be scope for that. But so far, I think this could be the season that we start to move away from Andreas Pereira. And I think it's a shame, because he's been so great for us and such an important addition. But it also feels maybe like the right time, if you've got Smith-Rowe, who I'm very excited about, and we've definitely not seen the best of him yet. We've seen flashes of the best of him, and that has been enough to excite a lot of us. What you do with Andreas Pereira is a really interesting discussion. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Is there a spot for Andreas in this side? Do you think if he's playing in that 8 role, do you think we're getting the best out of him? Would you like to see him kept there? And what do you think is Fulham's best midfield 3? when we're at full strength this season, because it's been for the past couple of years actually quite easy to pinpoint Fulham's best three midfielders. This season it feels a little bit harder. So I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. I hope you enjoy the rest of the international break. Take a little bit of a pause from Fulham. It is always a roller coaster at the start of the season and deadline day. So take a breather, and we will see you next week for some more content over on the Fulham YouTube channel. Thank you very much for watching. Come on, you Whites.